What is up, most distinguished patrons of this channel? Today I have a video that is not a questions from the toolbox, but it is a viewer question, and it's something I haven't really talked too much about before, and this affects far more than welders. It affects anyone that works at a job, I guess, and that is worksite safety and what to do if your employer or your work situation is dangerous in the sense that it's putting your health or you at risk. So with that said, let's get into it. Almost anyone who's been in the working world for a while and had numerous jobs has probably been put in a situation that's basically unsafe or dangerous, or you get that tickle in your pickle, as I call it, where you know something's wrong and that you probably shouldn't do what you're doing. Like anyone who works on a roof or any kind of reasonably dangerous job, enters confined spaces, you'll get that tickle feeling that, hey, it's dangerous, pay attention. Where that becomes a serious problem is when your employer, or basically whatever job you're doing, puts you in a situation where your pickle is tickling, right? And you can't do anything about it, and they force you or tell you you have to do something that you know is dangerous, and you don't want to do it, but at the same time, you don't want to get fired. And that is kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to start out by explaining what your rights are in my terms, because you have to understand I'm not a head of safety and I'm not a lawyer and I'm not a lot of things, but I can tell you what OSHA in this country, United States, says. So we're going to start out by talking about that, and then I'm going to share a very real, very serious situation that I was involved in, not me personally, but you'll see a story about something that's so appallingly bad that I guess it might change your perspective on what employers might actually do to employees and why it's so important to do something about it. So to start things off, OSHA says that your workplace shall be free of recognized hazards and basically things that are serious concerns or possibility for you to get hurt. So it has to be free of that. Now, what they're really meaning is if you work in a mine and it's full of asbestos, guess what? You can't get rid of the asbestos, but they have to provide you with protection to protect you against that, okay? Because there's a lot of jobs like the mining industry, wastewater, where you have to enter confined spaces in any job, paint production facilities. There's all sorts of careers out there that you're around hazards all day, like asbestos abatement. Like, it has to be done. So employer has to provide you PPE or personal protective equipment to protect you against those hazards. So just because there are hazards present in a workplace doesn't mean that you just have to shut down work and you can't do it. The employer has to provide ways to mitigate the risk. So like in the case of a job where you have to abate asbestos from, say, a bunch of boiler piping, they can't just tell you, here's a paper mask, or hey, hold your breath and rip all that stuff out. They can't do that legally. Now, that doesn't mean that they won't tell you to do it, and it doesn't mean that you won't be forced to, okay? Like, an employer can do anything they want, but you need to recognize the hazards in your workplace and say, you know what, that's not safe, I'm not doing it. And if they were to fire you or discipline you, you have a case with OSHA to go back after them and say, hey, look what they're trying to make me and other people do. This is dangerous. They don't provide proper protective equipment. Okay, I think you get the picture on that. Now, the problem is that OSHA and the government recognizes that when you work for someone, you probably work for them because you need money, right? If you don't have money, you don't pay rent, you don't pay your car payment, you don't pay child support, you don't pay any number of things. So the power an employer has over you is significant. And that's why a lot of times employers can get away with making people do things that are dangerous themselves or outright illegal, because they know that they have people by the balls. They need the job, and they're probably not going to report it simply because if they were to be found out, they could be fired, right? Well, there's a caveat to that. If you report something to OSHA for being unsafe and a case gets activated about it, which pretty much every complaint a caseworker will be put on it, and they terminate you for reporting it, guess what? They legally cannot do that, and then a lawyer could get involved, and then you could sue that employer for retaliation. Like, that is not tolerated, not allowed. Does it happen? I'm sure it does. Like, when I talk about this stuff, trust me, there's a lot of shady stuff that happens out there. Like, my story later will prove it. But you have to do something, because one of the things you're going to find out is that, okay, you're afraid of losing your job if you report it. Well, there are protections, but an employer could fire you for any reason, and then you would have to get a lawyer and fight it. But you have to do the right thing. It doesn't matter if you lose your job. I know that sounds really ridiculous, but it's not just about you. If you don't report it, nobody else reports what's going on, people could wind up killed or long-term health injuries because nobody did anything. So you need to report stuff not just for your sake, but for other people's sake. And if you just don't want to deal with it and you think it's unsafe, I hate to tell you, buddy, you need to look for another place of employment. No job is worth losing your health or your life over blatantly stupid stuff. And one of the common questions is, well, what's blatantly stupid? Well, I think we all know that. But if you're uneducated, say you're working in a chemical facility and they give you no training as to what chemicals you're working with, what you're around all day, what to do in an emergency, if they give you no training for that, you're in what I call the functionally ignorant state. And that's not a good place to be in, because what happens if you accidentally mix chemicals or something spills and you have no training, you have no idea what's around you. And that's where another part of OSHA comes in, that is a law that they can enforce, which is that if you're around recognized hazards, you have to have training on how to deal with that. And if they don't provide any training, that is an OSHA violation. So again, it all goes back to, there's pretty well clear established rules regarding workplace and safety that came about for good reason, because too many people like you and me died or had serious long-term health problems because employers were either too ignorant, didn't care, or purposefully put people in harmful situations. And guess what? When you're dead, it's not worth pulling a lawsuit. Like, what good is it if you get money after you're dead? Can't use it. So protect yourself. So I'm going to share a story with you that's 100% true, and I'll leave links in the description to information regarding this to verify this story if you're interested. It is 100% truthful. So a long time ago, I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 9 years ago, a friend of mine started a job at a chemical handling facility. What this place did, I soon found out after he started, is chemical totes. They processed empty ones and either reused them via cleaning, cut them up for scrap, or just flat out manufactured new ones. I guess they took parts of different ones to then resell. So they handled chemical totes. This facility was one of, I guess, 3 facilities in the county, and each one had a specialty. You had one that dealt with drums, so like 55-gallon drums. You had one that dealt with totes, the one that my buddy worked at, and then you had another one that handled an assortment of stuff. Okay, so all of them were linked to one company, and that company changed hands multiple times, of course, as all these shady companies do. Anyways, so my buddy started there, and within, I don't know, a month, he started telling me stories of what they were doing at that facility. And the stories were so far ridiculous, I didn't believe them. Like, it didn't make sense. And one of those was, trucks would show up. So think of a U-Haul box truck or a semi full of these 330 plus gallon chemical totes. And he and other workers would take these totes that would have anywhere from nothing, so 5 gallons or a cup of chemicals, up to 100 gallons in them, and they would process them by draining them into a vat with complete disregard to what chemical was inside of that tote. And they would then take the empty tote, put them on a bandsaw, so like a bandsaw that's on with a roller feed table to cut them apart, and whatever chemical was in there would drain to a drain table into a barrel at the end, and it was common for that barrel to mix and then start smoking, and the building would fill with chemical smoke. And he's telling me this. I'm like, dude, there's no way. Like, this is just asinine. And I started asking him to take pictures of some of these chemical totes so I could see what chemicals are in it. He sends me pictures, and there's everything from benzene, toluene, xylene, chemical stripper, adhesive glue, literally anything that could be in a tote was going to this facility, and they were processing them all the same way. And I'm like, well, what happens when the building fills up with smoke? He says, well, the boss tells us to go across the street and wait until he said that it's, safe to go back in. I said, do you have any kind of gas monitoring equipment? He goes, no. I'm like, okay, does the boss call a fire department? No. I'm like, and you just go back in? He says, oh yeah, it's like you might still be coughing in there when this is going on. And I'm like, really? Like this is too far-fetched. And so I dig and ask for more information, and he's telling me that not only that, but they have a pile of shop vacs, and they make employees take the shop vac and suck out the liquid if there's like under 5 gallons, 10 gallons left in a tote, and suck it out with a shop vac. Any tote that would come in. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, this doesn't even make sense. And come to find out even more stuff regarding this is he said that the trucks that showed up, so these semis, they had no placarding to what they were carrying. They had no bill of lading that said what they're carrying, so no information of chemicals. Half the totes that they were processing had no placards or any information as to what's even in it. And he said that clearly a lot of them had some pretty bad, nasty chemicals in it just by the smell. So clearly right now this is bad enough, but it gets even worse. He said that they were actively dumping chemicals down a drain system that was in the building into the public sewer. And like, I'll spare the details, but it got even more ridiculous than what I just said. So clearly this is bad, including, oh, I forgot, having people weld inside of stainless steel chemical drums from the inside, welding them with no PPE. And by the way, there was no PPE at the site, no masks, no respirators, no nothing. And people would pressure wash totes and get sprayed with chemicals. There were open holes to a pit in the ground that people fell in and dipped their leg and had burns on it. Like, we're talking world-class bad, something you'd expect in the 1800s, let alone, in 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I heard enough about this, and he provided me enough proof to where I believed him. And what I did is I wrote a formal complaint to OSHA on his behalf. And what I mean is I filled out the forms online. They're very easy. And I put all the information. I put a lot of keywords that, well, they weren't fabrications, but I made it very clear to OSHA what was going on because it was so far ridiculous. So there was no question. I gave it to him. He submitted it under his name to OSHA. And within a couple weeks, OSHA came out for an investigation and couldn't believe what they found. So not only did they investigate that facility, but the violations were so bad that they found there that state representatives for the state of Wisconsin got involved with it. So rather than talking and editing the articles in, I figured I would talk over some of these clips from actual articles as well as investigation. So you can see here that they basically busted all 3 facilities at the same time because they believed that they were committing a cover-up, which they definitely were. So clearly the government's a little bit smarter than people probably give them credit for. And over 70 violations at 3 plants. Pretty crazy. Here we have a $108,000 fine, which to me was low because not only were some of the things that they were busted for repeat offenses, and they had ample evidence that it was willful and they knew what was going on. And when you have those circumstances, the fines can be increased because there is actually a limit per violation that OSHA can charge someone with, except when it's willful or repeat. Those caps are eliminated. Numerous federal laws were violated with the Clean Air Act as well. And I couldn't find the clipping from the newspapers, but some investigators, when they were investigating one of the facilities, fell ill in the hotel room that they had rented and were dizzy and vomiting, likely due to chemical exposure. And I'll stop talking on this, just read this. One of their facilities was dumping large amounts of mercury down the sewer, and the mercury contamination was so bad in the facility that all the workers had to bring their clothes in to be disposed of, anything that they would have worn at the facility, because they were bringing mercury home with them. That's how bad this is. So the whole situation's bad enough, and come to find out, during this investigation that the state and the local governments were doing, a person came out and apparently was investigating a boss or owner at corporate level and was wearing a wire, and caught audio of this individual basically admitting to knowing that they're poisoning people, and that he laughed about it and basically didn't care. So they literally had audio on a owner, co-owner, or a very high up boss, that they were all well aware of what was going on there. They knew it was illegal and they knew it was dangerous. And it's basically a completely screwed situation, and it's not something you would expect would happen, in 2020 or so, 2019. But the reality is that there are places like that out there, and they are completely unsafe and dangerous, and you need to recognize that and do at least something, even if it's just getting out of the situation. But still, you should file a formal complaint, because it help out other people. So with that said, here's the deal. I get it. We all need a paycheck. I get it. We've all done stuff that's stupid, dangerous, and could have got us hurt or somebody else hurt. Where it crosses the line is when your boss is telling you you don't have a choice or I'll fire you. Or if they're completely ignorant to the dangers that are around you and you're not, and you recognize that. And if your employer just provides zero training and expects you to be around dangerous chemicals or situations, those are all indications that you need to do something about it, and at a bare minimum, get the hell out of the situation and preferably file a complaint. Now, in case you're wondering, when you file a complaint with OSHA, they do not tell the employer that you are the one that reported it. And even if your employer found out that it was you and they try to take disciplinary action, the law is on your side. It will protect you. Now, they could fire you still for reporting it, but you would win in a lawsuit. And there's plenty of lawyers that would take up that kind of lawsuit because it's an easy win, So it's all things to consider. Hopefully this video gave you some better ideas of real life situations as well as what to do. In the comments, like I said, I will link to articles regarding what I talked about in the story that I did, as well as I have links to OSHA's forms and stuff to where you can fill out a complaint of your own. Because I don't want to see anyone get hurt or sick on the job for unnecessary BS. I mean, the reality is a lot of jobs out there are dangerous, but there are some things that just flat out cross the line. And I think you understand what I mean by that. So with that said, be safe, be smart, and take care of yourself.